STO or Y1, the midnight knocking no one could explain. You ever lie awake and convince yourself the house is breathing, like its walls are inhaling slow and long, and every inhale pulls a little more of you into some kind of patient, polite darkness? That's where this begins, not with a scream or a thunderstorm, but with a polite, precise sound that did not belong to anything living in my house. It was the first night I stayed alone in the Mercer place, an old two-story on Maple Street in a town small enough that the grocery store still knew your name. Harrison, Ohio, population somewhere just under 10,000, where Friday nights meant high school football under bright stadium lights, and the diner on Main put cherry pie under the glass every Saturday without fail. I'd taken the house sit because my sister was pregnant and needed help, because the mortgage was eating into her savings, because it paid more than I expected, and because the house was the sort of place that smelled like wood polish and old books, and knew the way to make you feel like you'd landed inside somebody else's memory. I was never supposed to be there for more than a month. 2 weeks in, I was home alone, laundry done, dishes stacked, a mug of coffee gone cold by the sink. The clock on the stove blinked 11:58. I was about to head upstairs when I heard it. 3 sharp, measured knocks, like knuckles tapping a wooden door. 1, 2, 3, and not at the front door where the porch light hung, but from inside the house. I froze, hand on the stair rail. The sound came again, exactly 1 minute later. 1, 2, 3, deliberate, patient, the kind of rhythm you could hum along to if you wanted to pretend this was normal. I'll tell you straight, rational me did the obvious things. I called out, "Hello?" but my voice sounded small, like it had been swallowed by the house. I walked the full length of the lower floor, running my hand along the banister, checking every door, all locked. The windows were dark and shutter quiet. I found nothing. I told myself it was the pipes, or the dryer settling, or the neighbor with a late night prank. I turned on every lamp and braced the deadbolt on the front door like a child who believes a lock is a prayer dot at midnight. The knock started again, not on the door, on the wall beside the staircase. There's something about a house when the right light hits it. It changes from being for walls and a roof into a map of every mistake and secret it keeps. Mercer House had a narrow hallway that ran up to the second floor landing, flanked by a wall of family photos. There was Mr. Mercer with his hand on the shoulder of a woman whose smile was faded around the edges. A younger me with my mom at a July 4th parade. A Polaroid of someone else I didn't know. The knock gamely tapped the plaster next to those frames, like someone stalling, like a visitor unsure whether to enter. I stood there and listened as the second hand on the clock carved its impatient arc. The knocks came at exactly 12, then 12:01, then at 22:01. Every hour and every minute the same. 3 knocks, 1, 2, 3. No footsteps, no voice, nothing that made sense. Daylight offered no relief. I went through the motions. I searched the attic, pulled back floorboards in the laundry room, checked the crawl space beneath the porch. No hollow places, no vents where a hand could fit. I asked neighbors. Carol from 2 doors down shrugged and said her dog was a restless barker, but she hadn't heard anything. The boy who mowed the Mercer's lawn earlier that day said he'd been at the ballpark until 9 and seen nothing odd. "You sure it wasn't someone messing with you?" he asked, lowering his voice. I wanted to tell him it felt different. Not a prank, not the clumsy bravado of kids. Something deliberate. That night I put my phone on record, pushed the bed up against the door to my bedroom, and sat on the floor, knees pulled in, feeling absurd and brave in equal measure. At 12 the knocks came, soft but precise. I pressed the phone screen to the wall and let it capture sound. I fell asleep after the 3rd round, the kind of exhausted sleep that hinges on adrenaline and denial. When I woke at 3:17 a.m., the radiant alarm on my phone flashed, a 3-second audio clip, the kind you only get when an app decides it's done waiting. In the morning I listened with the coffee cup half to my lips. 3 knocks, muffled but there. Then silence. Between the knocks, a whisper. I played it louder, cupped my hands around the tiny speaker. At first I thought it was my imagination, a syllable carried by the vibrations, but there it was, clearer when I slowed it down. Jason, my name, as precise and plain as the knock, not shouted, not mournful, quiet the way someone might read a number off a list. There are 2 ways to react to being told your own name by a house you don't own. You get in the car and you leave, where you start looking for reasons it would call you. I chose the second, because running felt like admitting defeat, and because if a voice exists that can say your name without lungs, You owe that voice honesty and a braver explanation than I'm out of here. So I dug through the Mercer's history. I sat at the kitchen table with a flashlight and a stack of printed property records and old newspapers. There were faded clippings, an obituary for Ruth Mercer, who passed in 1999, a short note about a summer fair in Harrison where the Mercers donated a pie, a one-paragraph line in the 2003 column about a local teen named Tyler Hayes, who went missing for 3 days and returned with no memory of where he'd been. No one had linked the Hayes boy to the house, but in the margins, someone had written basement in smudged pencil. I started talking to people who knew the Mercers. Mrs. Alvarez from the diner remembered Ruth's soft laugh. She also remembered that Ruth had a son, David, who left town around the time that Tyler Hayes vanished. David did odd jobs, she said, warming a mug without shaping her face into anything like pity. Kept to himself, left suddenly like a man with his pockets full of reasons. The town sheriff, a square-jawed man named Tom Radley, was kind enough to humor my questions when I mentioned the knocking. He grew thoughtful and protective in a way I'd seen in him before. The way a man who knows every road doesn't like new potholes. Old houses make noises, he said. Neighbors have lived here all their lives. But then he paused, just long enough for me to notice. If you hear something that sounds like your name, that's not Pipes, Jason. He didn't say it was impossible. He didn't say it was normal either. He told me to keep a log dot, so I wrote it down. Midnight, 3 knocks. 1 a.m., 3 knocks. My name in the silence after the second round, like the aftertaste of something metallic. A tiny sketch of the landing with an X where the knock seemed to originate. It felt both futile and necessary, as if writing the pattern made it a command I could obey. The knocking changed on the 3rd week. At first it followed the same schedule, patient, exact, but then it began to vary. Sometimes it would come at 11:56, teasing me early like a friend trying to wake you up before the bad dream arrives. Other nights it waited until the 20 a.m. and hammered the wall in a flurry of rapid-fire threes. Once, it knocked at both ends of the house nearly simultaneously, the wall by the stairs and the kitchen. Pantry. I paced, heart thudding, half expecting to be trapped in a slow, domestic siege. There's a peculiar kind of fear that arrives when something starts learning you. It watched the way I reacted, which doors I checked, how I left the lamp on in the hallway. It learned I was the kind of person who flips lights and calls the sheriff instead of breaking a window. It learned my schedule. It started knocking the minutes before I get up from my morning coffee like clockwork. I'd open my eyes and there would be that strange rhythm somewhere beneath the floorboards, as if the house itself were reminding me that someone or something was keeping time. I set up more cameras. I put a recorder in the hallway, a motion sensor at the base of the stairs, and a cheap nanny cam in the frame of the living room portrait. The footage rarely showed much, a blur of darkness where no shadow should have been. Once the still frame from the camera at the bottom of the stairs showed a smear of what looked like condensation along the banister that resolved into nothing. When played back in real time, the audio would pick up the knocks, the muffled whisper that sounded like my name, and then static that rose like the hiss of an old radio left on a forgotten station. Neighbors started to notice the light. Old Mr. Callahan from across the street mentioned seeing me on the porch at 2 a.m. with a cigarette in my hand like a little signal to the neighborhood that something was wrong. He brought over an extra bag of ice as if to patch a wound. People are gentle in small towns. They fill your freezer, they bring casseroles, and they ask only once how you're holding up. And the house, it kept finding small ways to be intimate. My toothbrush would move from the cup to the edge of the sink. A blanket would be folded on the armchair in a way I knew I hadn't placed it. Once, I found a coin, a dime, placed perfectly atop the hall runner, right where bare feet would pass. There was an economy to these gestures, like a household host setting a place at the table for someone who's not quite there yet. One night, exhausted, I left the light on and fell asleep on the couch with the TV playing a late-night talk show. I woke to the sound of soft knocking and the television's laugh track, perfectly out of sync. The knocks were faint, like someone tapping with a fingernail. And then, impossibly close, inches from the back of my head, a whisper clearer than I'd ever heard it. Jason. I turned like a boxer hearing the bell. There was no one. The room smelled faintly of cedar and old paper. The hair on my arms rose. I wanted to run, to slam doors and take the next bus out of town, but something more stubborn than fearsome strange ownership kept me there. I spoke back. Who are you? My voice was a borrowed thing. Silence, and then the rhythm again. 3 measured knocks, and a new sound underneath, like someone breathing softly into the plaster itself. The whisper returned, this time a string of words that resolved when I slowed them down later. Don't forget. Don't forget what? I had no idea. The way memory works is odd. Some things come back in floods, others in the tiniest drops. The town had its own ledger of names you were supposed to remember, and some you were carefully taught to avoid. Tyler Hayes, who'd vanished for 3 days. David Mercer, who left town with pockets full of reasons. Ruth Mercer, who kept the house immaculate and kept to herself in later years. The more I dug, the more frayed the edges of the town's memory became, as if some things had been intentionally erased. I started to dream of the house in daylight. In the dreams, someone ran a finger along the wall where the knocks occurred and found a strip of faded wallpaper, a smudge of writing beneath it. I woke with the idea of a name stuck at the back of my throat. When I went back to the kitchen table to rifle through the clippings again, I found the same pencil scribble I'd seen before, basement. This time the pencil mark was layered beneath another, as if someone had tried to rub it away. Basements in small-town America hold the soft bones of our lives, old Thanksgiving decorations, boxes of baby clothes, the freezer that stores summer into winter. The Mercer basement had been the sort of place that smelled like vinegar and the season you forgot. It wasn't a dungeon. It was a workroom with pegboard and a washing machine that rattled when it ran. The concrete was cool under my shoes, the stairs down creaked just enough to announce a visitor. I clicked the flashlight and descended. The air dropped an octave. Shelves lined one wall, jars of screws and nails, a small wood table with a faded radio. I circled the room, shining my light in the corners. Behind the furnace, behind a stack of Christmas boxes, I found a patch of wallpaper peeling at the seam. Beneath it, someone had scrawled in pencil, "Tyler." My heart lurched. The hand that had written it was shaky, as if it had been written by someone trying not to be noticed. Under it, another line almost completely rubbed away, Mercer David. The name Tyler matched the old clipping. The name David matched the Mercer's son who had left town. When I ran my fingers across the letters, the graphite smeared like fresh blood. There were footprints in the thin dust on the concrete floor, small, like a child's, leading to a corner where someone had stacked toys. A withered teddy bear lay there, one I'm missing. My flashlight beam trembled. I lifted the bear and found sewn into its back a folded scrap of paper. On it, written in a careful childish hand, was a map of the basement with an X marked at the corner of the table. I set the map down and then heard it. The same 3 knocks. Not from upstairs, not from somewhere else in the house, but from the very concrete beneath us, like someone used the floor as a drum. They were closer than they had ever been. There was no whisper that night, only the patient pause between the threes. Enough time for me to realize the knocks were timed to my breaths. What follows is messy because fear is not tidy. I called Sheriff Radley and told him what I had found. He came over with a deputy and the practical suspicion of a man who'd been awake too many nights to be surprised. They examined the basement, rubbed their knuckles along the wall under the peeling paper, and lifted the teddy bear like evidence at a county fair. "We'll run a check," the sheriff said. "See what this is about." The investigation turned Harrison inside out for a while. Old case files were dug up, and people who kept quiet for years found new reasons to speak. Locals clustered at the diner and swapped stories. Someone remembered David Mercer getting into a fight the week before he left town. Another person swore they'd seen a late-night truck by the Mercer's house. Back in the summer of the disappearance, the town's memory sputtered and coughed like an old car engine getting warmed up in winter. And then, as if in the script of a horror movie we'd all watched too many times, the knocks shifted. They became names, not just my name anymore. They began to say other people's names in that same breathy whisper, quiet, as if afraid of waking someone. One night it called out Ruth in a tone as soft as a mother tucking a child in. Another night, it said David, and the sound blurred into something older, like a radio left tuned to an AM station that picks up voices from a different decade. My phone started to ring with numbers I didn't recognize. People I'd never spoken to in my life left messages asking if I was okay, and then, sometimes, the calls were from people who had been alive the day the Mercer's life tilted toward trouble. A woman named Sandra, who used to babysit for the Hayes family, called to say Tyler had come to her one afternoon looking pale and tired, insisting something had been knocking at his window. He said it said his name. She told me. We laughed, told him it was the wind. He went still. He took a coin from his pocket and put it on the sill. He said that would keep it away. Double quotes coins. Remember the dime I found on the runner. The town had a weird habit of leaving small tokens, pennies glued to telephone poles, coins on stoops, tiny offerings next to the church door. There's a superstition here about paying for someone's trouble with small change, like leaving bread for birds. I started finding coins in strange places in the house, a nickel under my pillow, a quarter tucked beneath the flesh of the hallway post, a penny lodged in the kitchen faucet. Every coin had been rubbed to a shine as if someone had gripped it for comfort before laying it down. Something else was changing. My dreams grew longer and stranger. I dreamed of being in the stands at a high school game and seeing the Mercers in the crowd. Ruth with her neat hair, David with a baseball cap pulled low, Tyler Hayes sitting off to the side like a kid in a painting who didn't belong. In the dream, the scoreboard flickered and showed a time that matched the knocks. Names scrolled across the screen as if people were statistics. Tyler Hayes, missing 3 days. David Mercer, left town, no further record. The scoreboard blinked my name too. The way a camera focuses on an audience member and holds you there, I started to suspect that the house was over, and not with a hand scratch, then it just sent someone had left open. The name was called and someone remembered. It felt like a ledger balancing. If no one remembered, the name kept knocking. Patient as a tax collector. Then came the night that changed everything. It was raining hard. A summer storm that made the gutter sing. I've been awake most of the night, doing what I've been doing for weeks, watching screens, reading transcripts, looking for pattern. At 1 a.m., the knocks came, louder than ever. I sat up with my chest tight and the lights blazing, ready for whatever came next. The camera in the living room showed nothing but the living room. The hallway camera showed the frame of the stairwell, empty, and then the knocking moved. I could feel it, like thunder running along the bones of the house. It changed its rhythm and then, as if deciding on punctuation, it tapped in a new sequence. 1, then 2, then a long pause, then a string of quick taps. And between those taps, quiet and clear as breath on glass, a voice, not a whisper this time, but a word making itself into a code. Return. Return to what? Return to whom? The word wrapped around me like fog. That morning the sheriff and I went down to the basement again. Someone had left a folded note in the mail slot for me. It was anonymous, the handwriting blocky. Don't ignore it, it said. They get louder when they are forgotten. Whoever left it had added a directions map in shaky ink. A path through town that led to the old fairgrounds on the edge of Harrison. A place nobody used much anymore. We drove out there under a hard sky that promised rain. The fairgrounds had a Ferris wheel with a rusted skeleton and concession stands boarded up. It felt like a place time forgot on purpose. The sheriff had a flashlight and a serious face. The kind men with badges cultivate like an older uniform. We walked the line of old booths and stood beneath the Ferris wheel, its metal looking like a sunless gear. There, tucked in the roots of the wheel, was another dusty teddy bear, its paw missing, and a coin laid beside it, a dime, worn smooth. The sheriff frowned and picked up the bear. Tyler Hayes was 7 when he went missing. He said quietly, "If this is from him, it's been out here a long time." You could write any number of sentences here about logic, about investigation, about evidence. But the most important thing is this: the town had secrets, and secrets like to sleep until someone knocks on their door, and when they wake, they sometimes want to be remembered. We took the bear and the dime back to the station. I slept in my car that night more out of stubbornness than caution, the radio playing a slow blues track as rain tapped the roof. At 12 a.m. the knocking began, and this time the voice was not only saying names, it was repeating a phrase in a cadence that matched the rhythm we had started to notice when we read old notebooks. Return, please, return. I don't know how to tell you the next part without making it feel like a confession. The town began to stitch together like a quilt with an ugly center. People I'd spoken to years ago were suddenly part of the story. A neighbor who remembered a truck idling near the Mercer's house. A postman who'd once found a bundle on the porch and assumed it was a donation. A teenager who remembered Tyler showing him a small, folded map and asking for directions home even though he lived 15 blocks away. And still the knocks came, now in a chorus. Sometimes they were far and hollow like someone knocking at the sky. Other times they were sharp and personal. One night, in a moment of reckless longing for answers, I pressed my ear to the wall and asked, "What do you want from me?" As if the thing that was making the noise might be neighborly and have a clear agenda. There was a long silence like a paused conversation, and then a whisper inaudible to anyone else. We forgot to tell you. We what? I thought, who we? The question is a dangerous thing because in the dark it leaves a doorway. I started to take a list. Names of all the people connected somehow to the house and the time frame. Ruth Mercer, David Mercer, Tyler Hayes, Mr. Callahan, Sandra the babysitter, the postman, the boy who mowed lawns, and then my own name because the thing had said it once. And because who doesn't feel like they deserve the attention of a house that calls out to them? It was Sheriff Radley who finally said the thing that made the rest seem inevitable. He sat at his desk, thumb worrying the edge of a photograph, and said in that low sheriff voice, "You know how small towns keep things tidy? We tidy memories, Jason, file them. Sometimes we tuck them away like boxes in a basement and tell ourselves they're dusted. But we forget they have edges." He talked about an old practice, not malicious, not even conscious, where towns would cover up the inconvenient, a stray accident, an argument, a teenage mistake. They would whisper, "Let's not make this a thing." And then they'd all go home and go on with a life that included supper and church and school plays. Sometimes the things that were tucked away needed names, and the town took those names and turned them into stories you told at the diner. "You think the house is asking to be remembered," the sheriff said, "not just about facts, but for the people. It's hungry for recollection, hungry for recollection." If that sounds poetic, it's because it is, because how else do you say that someone, something, was demanding you remember a person the way you remember your child's birthday or your own mother's laugh? He suggested I hold a small memorial. It was the kind of idea that sounds almost naive. Light a candle, place a photograph, say a name out loud. But I agreed because sometimes ritual is the only map you have when you're lost. We gathered at the Mercer House on a gray Sunday afternoon. The sheriff lit candles in the living room. Neighbors brought casseroles and photos. Someone printed out a picture of Tyler from a town scrapbook, a freckle-faced boy in a Little League uniform. Someone else glued pictures of David from a yearbook, his grin a little crooked. We placed the coins people had found on the staircase in a line like offerings. We said names, Ruth, David, Tyler. People spoke softly and some of us cried. The house listened. At midnight that night, the knocks changed again. They came slow, 3 at a time, and after each set the house quieted, as if listening to the sound of our voices even when we weren't there to speak. The whispers returned, softer now, but not necessarily kinder. They spoke as if reading a list, as if someone had finally turned a page. "Tyler," the house said, "remember, in the morning." Someone found a new scrap of paper taped behind the portrait on the landing. On it someone had carefully written a single sentence, "Find where we left the rest. Find where we left the rest." It was a phrase like a key with half the teeth missing. The idea that we had left something behind, not in the house this time, but somewhere town held, made the sheriff frown. He said, "There's old Fuller's Field, past the mill. We used to bury things there, not people, but things. We went to Fuller's Field before dawn. The grass was heavy with dew, and the sky looked like the inside of a bruise. There was a stone wall circling the field, and beyond that the foundations of an old shed. We brought shovels. People in Harrison know how to hold a shovel the way some know how to hold a fork. It's muscle memory. We dug where the sheriff suggested, where the land sloped and seemed to hold its breath. It was colder under the surface. The smell of old soil rose up like scent from a memory. We hit something hard after an hour, a metal box with a ring of rust. My hands were numb as the sheriff pried it open. Inside were newspapers folded in on themselves, a child's jacket, and a small stack of photographs tied with a ribbon. The top image was of Tyler with his arm around David Mercer, both of them looking at the camera like co-conspirators. A letter was at the bottom of the box. The handwriting looked like Ruth's. The paper folded had been kept dry under wax. We read it aloud in the gray morning. It said, in part, we could not leave him in town. Not then. We thought if we hid him in the field, if we put his things away and said nothing, we could make the pain stop. We did not know pain doesn't end when you tuck it away. It grows. The sheriff's jaw tightened. This is why people forget, he said, because they think burying a thing will make it quiet. Only it hadn't. The house in Maple Street had found a way to speak for the things we'd hidden, and the more carefully the town had hidden them, the louder the knocking had become. When we returned the items to the Mercer's house, the air felt different, as if the town had exhaled and was holding a more honest breath. We laid Tyler's jacket on the couch, placed the photos on the mantel, and the sheriff left the box open on the table like an offering. That night there were no knocks. The silence felt volatile, like a glass about to shatter. I lay awake and listened for any breath, any shifting of the house's bones. At 2 a.m., I heard the faintest scrape, like fingernails along a ledger, and then a sound that was not knocking, but speech in a tone that did not belong to any spoken language but was clear to me. "Thank you," it said. I sat up, not sure if it had been the house or my own tired mind being generous. Morning light spilled into the kitchen and cast long, honest beams across the floorboards. Sheriff Radley came by with his coffee. He was tired, but there was a small light in his eyes I'd not seen before. "You did the right thing," he said. "You can tell yourself closure comes in tidy forms. You can place photographs, say words, weep, but grief is not tidy." The house had wanted to be remembered, and we had given it names and faces and coins and the box from the field. That seemed to quiet it for a while, like a fever breaking. But even when a fever breaks, you watch the patient because you know the virus is still in the room. For a couple of weeks, there was only the ordinary settling and groaning of an old house. People in Harrison slept easier. The sheriff smiled at me in the diner and stayed an extra minute, sometimes to ask whether I had slept well. But late one night, about a month after the box was found, I woke to a knocking that was different. Not at the stair wall, but at my bedroom door. 3 slow taps. The sound was close enough to reach me without moving from my sheets. I felt stupid for being frightened of a door, of a sound everyone makes in movies and then runs from. But the knock carried the weight of history now. I got up and opened the door. No one was there, but below, at the foot of the bed, a small coin waited on the carpet, a dime with the year stamped 1999. I picked it up and read the date. 1999 was the year Ruth Mercer died. The dime felt warm, as if it had just been held. Underneath the dime was a scrap of paper folded into a small square. It read, in a neat, adult hand, "Remember me when the house forgets you." A chill crawled up my spine. The house had not finished with memory. It seemed the more we remembered, the more precise the house's needs became. It wanted not just to be acknowledged, but to be involved, to keep participating in the lives it touched. It wanted an ongoing relationship, like a neighbor who keeps asking you for sugar until you realize they intend to rebuild there. Whole life on your DOO or STOP died from that night forward. The knocks were hardly ever the same. Sometimes they mimicked the sound of a child tapping a toy, and sometimes they had the cadence of an old radiator collapsing. They became, inconveniently, polite. They would tap 3 times at midnight and then wait as if waiting for an answer. This forced the town to decide to do what small towns rarely do, to stay curious. People began to stop by the Mercer House on Tuesdays and Saturdays, leaving a coin, a photograph, a whispered name. Old Mrs. Alvarez made soup and left it on the porch. The teenage boy who mowed lawns brought over a model airplane he had built and placed it on the stairs. People marked a little calendar on the wall of the diner, remembering nights, Mercer House. It became almost like a community ritual. You could feel the town learning the muscle memory of memory, a strange loop where remembering kept the house quiet and forgetting woke it again. Life returned to some level of ordinary, with the oddness folded into it like a new seam. I sat on the porch some evenings and watched kids ride bikes, their sneakers throwing up dust, and I felt a small, strange gratitude that the town had chosen to talk openly about what had happened. It seemed a better story than the one where no one spoke and everything collapsed into silence. But the house, even attended, was not content to be a museum of old things. It wanted to be included. It wanted a conversation. One late November evening, a woman arrived at the door I'd never seen before. She was not a neighbor and not someone in town records. Her hair was cropped close and gray like old milk, and her eyes had the steady look of someone who's observed a lot of small town theater. She said her name was Eleanor Finch. She carried a green satchel and a notebook. I grew up in Harrison, she told me when I let her in. I lived a block from here. I left, came back when my father died. She sipped the coffee I offered and scanned the room with the kind of attention that said she had been sizing things up for longer than politeness. Aloud, "You heard about the Mercer House?" I asked. She nodded like a person who had been waiting to be asked. Houses take what you give them and take more if you're sloppy. People think they can bury things, and some of us do for a living. We catalog, we remember. Sometimes a house will keep trying to tell you something, and you have to listen differently. She told me that she had once worked with an archivist in another state, someone who specialized in town memory, the small rituals or places where communities hid away things that made them uncomfortable. It's not evil, she said. It's method. You tuck grief under the floorboard and it becomes a story no one tells. But stories want a teller. Eleanor had come because she had read about the knocks online. For a small town like Harrison, the internet had been a confessional and a loudspeaker. She had experience, she said, with waking up the past and negotiating with it. That's how she put it, negotiating. People think you can fix the past by slapping bandages on it, she said. But the past is a stubborn creature. You make a bargain. You speak its name the right way. You set the table. Eleanor spent weeks in town. She worked with the sheriff, sorted through the county archives, and interviewed people who barely remembered their own names. She recorded oral histories in the diner, which felt like giving voice to the furniture. We mapped out the dates, the objects, the names. We found links between events that seemed disconnected. A truck idled near the Mercers. A boy came to Sandra's pale and terrified. Someone found a bundle on the porch and moved it away like a hot thing. When you line up the dates and the objects, a line appears, not a direct thread of malice, but a messy human chain of choices that culminated in a small boy being put in a field and in a family leaving town with things unsaid. Eleanor taught us how to do rituals properly. We didn't have to do spooky things. That wasn't her method. We just had to do the human things, names read aloud with intention, objects returned to their owners in plain sight, and small acts of witness. These were not glamorous acts, but they were honest. The house responded. The knocks softened. The whispers became less like someone calling names from a ledger and more like a conversation that had been sitting in a waiting room. To long die, it's tempting to draw a neat moral here, to say that remembering is its own cure and that if we only look back, the past will behave. But the thing about memory is that it doesn't come without a cost. For every person we remembered, another small detail emerged that demanded attention. The town discovered debts of care that had been unpaid for years. Who would care for an old dog that belonged to a family who left? Who would maintain the graves of those the town had quietly forgotten? Memory requires maintenance, and maintenance asks for time and money and the dignity of attention. Still, for a while it worked. The house quieted. I slept without the radio of whispers in my head. The sheriff stopped bringing his knuckles to his mouth when he talked about the case. People began to speak the names of those who had vanished without the weight of shame. Tyler Hayes' picture sat in the diner window, his freckles highlighted by the afternoon sun dot. But then, on the first cold night of January, the house did something that no one had predicted. It opened the door. I woke to a creak at 2 a.m., the kind that suggests a hinge is becoming interested in motion again. The front door, the one with the stained glass and brass knob, the one I deadbolted every night, stood open a crack. Rain let itself in like a gray hand. Outside, the world was empty and honest with snow beginning to fall. There was a shoe on the porch, a small, scuffed sneaker worn down in the heel. The sheriff and I went out in our socks to the porch and stared at the printed left. In the thin crust of wet, it matched the size of Tyler's shoes from the photograph. Beside the shoe lay a folded map that looked exactly like the ones kids made in secret, on the way to some adventure. The map led, of all places, back to Fuller's Field. We followed it because we had learned, stubbornly, that the house wanted us to. The path through the field, under the Ferris wheel, led to a small, sunken pit we had not seen before. At its center was a stone marker the sheriff did not recognize, and when we brushed the snow from his face we saw a name, Tyler Hayes, 1992 to 1999. We had found the marker where we had buried the box, only now, someone had placed a little bouquet of dried wildflowers at its base, and beside the bouquet, a coin, a dime. The house had opened its door and put back what it had been keeping outside, a small ring of truth. After that, things settled into a new kind of rhythm. The house no longer demanded constant attendance. It knocked sometimes, always politely, as if remembering to whisper hello when it passed you on the street. People still left coins and stories in the porch. The diner still kept Tyler's photo in the window. The sheriff retired the investigation file, but kept a copy in his glove box like a talisman. I stayed in the Mercer House until my sister's baby was born. It had been months since I'd first come, and I'd grown fond, despite everything, of the way the house remembered birthdays with the smell of baking, and the way it kept summer light pooled on the kitchen floor. On my last night, I sat on the front step and watched Harrison's small lights blink on like stitches. At 11:59, I heard a single, soft knock, not on the wall this time, but on the front door. I opened it a crack. No one stood there, but tucked in the hinge of the door was a scrap of paper with a coin taped to it. The coin had no date I could read. It seemed to have been polished smooth by its journey. On the paper someone had written in a careful hand, "Remember the ones who wait politely." If this story has a lesson, it might be that places remember the things people try to throw away. Old houses keep score. They collect the small omissions and carry them like a ledger because someone forgot to be kind. In that one small moment, memory is not merely about facts. It is about the way we make room for people who are not present. When you ignore the missing, the house remembers for you until the remembering insists that someone else do it. I moved out the next morning. My sister's house was full of baby sounds and the normal, chaotic life that dulled the edges you worry about at night. I took a coin from the Mercer stair with me, a dime with 1999 stamped faintly on it, and slipped it into my pocket before I closed the door for the last time. I left a photo of my sister's new baby on the mantel. I did not expect anything to happen. The house had taught me that for all its insistence on being remembered, it also liked small, weird courtesies. That night, miles away, in a house that had once taught me about names and knives of silence, someone counted the knocks and set out a coin on the stair like a promise. There are many ways to keep a pulse. We Americans are not bad at rituals, baking pies, mowing lawns, waving flags. Maybe now we add a quiet one, to remember the people who were tucked away with polite words, and consider how to bring them back to the table. You'll want a clean ending, I know. A closed loop, the kind where a string ties itself into a bow. But life, like houses, rarely gives tidy finishes. The last thing I saw before I left was a photograph leaning in the frame on the wall. Tyler at 7, David with a baseball cap, Ruth with her gentle smile. Someone had propped another picture next to them, one we hadn't found before, an unmarked Polaroid of a small girl with her head tilted, and a watch on her wrist. No name, no date. We'd managed to find some of what the town had misplaced. We'd done the rituals and pushed the boxes into the light. But the ledger had more pages. The house had more names to say when the night came. It was patient. If you live in a town where people tuck things away in neat piles, be careful what you sweep under the rug. Things remember. They wait politely, and when we turn our backs, they knocked also tonight. If you lie awake and think you hear a knock, 3 soft taps, patient and polite. Don't pretend it's the pipes. Don't pretend it's the raccoons or the neighbor's bad habit. Hold a lighter for a second and whisper a name. Say it out loud. Say the name of someone who should not be gone, even if you don't know why you're saying it. It may be nothing. It may be everything, because the last whisper I heard in that house, before I closed the door and drove away, and before the map of the town stitched itself a little straighter, was the same small voice I first heard on my phone in that 3-second clip. It was not angry. It was not bitter. It sounded, oddly, relieved. Don't forget, it said, and if you must forget, bring a coin. Cliffhanger. Chilling moral like to think that forgetting is a mercy, that to move on, we must bury the awkward and the painful. But forgetting can be a kind of theft, a way of taking a person's story and hiding it in the attic where no one will put flowers. Houses like the Mercer place will not let that theft stand. They will knock. They will call names. They will move objects just to make sure someone remembers to look. If you ever find yourself on a quiet street and hear a polite triple tap, that sounds like a clock counting down. Answer the knock. You might just be the one the house is waiting for. Or worse, you might be the next name it practices, 3 soft taps at a time, until someone remembers you too.